We're going.
It's so menacing.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for joining me today.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I normally start off with pretty much the same question, and that is, what have you got going on musically at the moment?
Well, my main performance vehicle, if you will, is my trio with my son and with Toby Lee Marshall on the Hammond organ and succulent right-hand bass that he plays on the keyboard bass. He's just a fiend. And we've been getting a lot of miles under our belt, gigging with that. We just came out with an EP a few months back called Melting the Farmhouse. And I have another record coming out this fall that is kind of a compilation of the bluesier bits from my past with two new tracks with some special guests on it. And that's going out on Devin Allman's label. And they're going to give it a good pushing. So we're going to be doing a bunch of more touring this summer. We're going to be going out west in the States here. We'll go down to Texas again and do some stuff around there and hit New Orleans. And then we're coming over to the EU and UK for a good 6-week jaunt in September and early October. And then once we get back, a couple weeks after that, we'll go to the East Coast and just working it, man, getting out there. And, the internet is one thing, but being in the room where it happens is an entirely different thing. And people have been coming out to see the band and are like, oh my God, I had no idea. I was like, that's why we're doing this.
I mean, you've always been a very prolific sort of performing artist. Have you got any tips for aspiring musicians as sort of how to survive on the road?
Well, the road is something that has meant different things for me over the years. A lot of my road work early on was, doing, I was a regional artist here in the States, traveling around doing a bit of stuff throughout the upper Midwest and do the occasional jaunt out to California, down south, so on and so forth. And then we would come over to Europe and we would tour with the band for a couple weeks, maybe a month out of the year, up until about 4 years ago when we really started hitting the road hard here in the States and then maintaining the Europe stuff as well. For me, it's just a matter of keeping that overhead low. And I've found that, it's me, my son, and Toby that go on the road. We do all the driving. We do the merch, the whole 9 yards. I book the hotels. We do it all. We do have a booking agent, and I have someone who helps me maintain some of the social media stuff in terms of making sure the dates get on all the various different websites and so on and so forth. But, do as much of the stuff you can on your own. And just, in the immortal words of Frank Zappa, he said, there's two things you got to remember: never quit and don't stop. But the more stuff you can control yourself and do on your own and not have to depend on other people, just as a rule in the music business, especially in this day and age, you're going to be more successful and ultimately happier.
That too many cooks thing.
Correct.
Also, do you enjoy the musical freedom that the trio presents you as well?
Well, absolutely. I've always enjoyed trios in general. But usually it would be the standard, guitar, bass, drums situation. And I've had some great lineups over the years. But I found that this particular unit with Dylan and Toby is probably the ultimate vehicle for what I do. I mean, Toby's a good 10 years younger than I am. And of course my son is, much younger. But what's interesting is it's like they're the perfect guys for what I do, influence wise. And because what I do is, it's like there's a heavy blues influence, but there's enough jazz and sophistication in that regard that you got to know how to navigate around that. But at the core of it is the not being afraid to rock, and that is lost on a lot of folks. So it's kind of the ultimate scenario. So we're able to go from kind of a almost like straight ahead type of vibe to just bare, ball busting rock 1 minute, and then really, really quiet blues to, it goes all over the map. But it does provide me with a a template and a freedom to explore stuff. And I love playing rhythm guitar. So having another soloist in the band really is fun for me because comping is a huge part of my thing. And obviously, if I'm playing in a trio with a bass player, the only time I'm comping is during the vocal sections, and even during that, it's more, especially if I'm doing the singing, it's compromised. So it's nice having the ability to kind of flex all my muscles, as it were, in this particular lineup.
Is there something to be said for that playing with a blood relative thing as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. I mean, there's definitely there's a chemistry that happens that we often go for the same syncopations at the same time. There's all kinds of weird symbiotic things that happen. And I always used to joke, people say, "How'd you get a drummer that good?" And I said, "Well, you got to make them." and the thing is about Dylan is that he loves, Bonham, Keith Moon, Ginger Baker, that kind of stuff. But he's also, he loves Steve Gadd, Bernard Purdy, and then studied jazz when he was in high school and in college. So he's got enough of that element to his playing as well that he understands that realm. But when it comes time to hit a snare, you won't find anyone who hits it quite as hard as the lad. And that's the thing that a lot of people, there's a lot of drummers who are used to, and granted, he's in a rarefied situation where I just say, go. Most drummers are so browbeaten, it's like they're always going, playing very timidly and, oh, you're too loud, play with blast sticks. And I'm like, no. We're going for the jugular. So don't be afraid. So he's definitely in a rarefied situation where he can let his freak flag fly. But yeah, that familial connection is really, it's a telepathic weird thing that's very cool.
You spoke a little bit there about all the different influences you have in your playing. Can you give me a little bit of background on how you got started on the guitar?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to play. I just had a fascination with kind of power trio stuff earlier on because of my older brother, who's 14 years older than myself. So I had to room with him because there were 5 girls in between. So I was the youngest of 7 kids. My brother was the oldest. We roomed together. So I was very much influenced by his record collection. He was a music enthusiast. He wasn't a player by any stretch, but he just loved, we played Cream records and Hendrix. And I just really latched on to Hendrix at a very early age. And Electric Ladyland was like a Bible to me. So I always wanted to play. Finally got my hands on the guitar. Within 9 months, I'd played my first gig and just kind of went from there. But those early influences of Hendrix, Cream era Clapton, certainly Zeppelin, Joe Walsh, Jeff Beck, all that kind of stuff. But very early on, I did the research as to who they listened to because I did read a lot of biographies of these guys. So, I mean, I saw Muddy Waters when I was 14 years old. I mean, I knew that stuff was at the roots of what these guys did. And I wanted to be able to not just be influenced by the guys I was immediately drawn to, but figure out where they got it from and where those guys got it from. So I've always been about trying to connect the dots and try in my own way, form my own voice based on that lineage of stuff. So it started off being very much kind of a blues rock or classic rock initial impetus to play. But then I quickly got into, the hardcore blues stuff and really listened to that quite a bit and continued to. But then I got into Albert Lee because he played with Eric Clapton. And then I started to figure out, well, where did he get that from? So then I started getting in these country influences, which led me to everywhere from Chet Atkins to Roy Buchanan, Danny Gatton, Jimmy Bryant, et cetera, et cetera. And then jazz stuff. So I really loved George Benson early on. George Benson, Charlie Christian, Grant Green. I was a huge Mike Stern, Schofield fan. I've always been a huge Schofield fan. Larry Carlton, Robin Ford, those types of guys. But also just, a hardcore Zeppelinite. There was something about Zeppelin for me was the ultimate cool guy band. I mean, they took all the influences and they put them all together and they said, you can like it or not, but we're going to rule the world in a dragon suit. And I thought, you know what? I'm on board with that. So I'm going to go with that as being cool. So that's always been a real big influence. I love the Allman Brothers, a huge Allman Brothers fan. I saw them early on too, and that had a huge effect on how I approached music, guitar, career, the whole nine.
Was the Allman Brothers influence one of the reasons you worked on your slide playing as well?
Initially, yes. I mean, I was just talking to my buddy Rick Vito today, who's a brilliant slide guitar player. And I was talking about how the first slide solo I ever learned was Mick Taylor's Love in Vain solo on Get Your Yayas Out with the Stones. And I loved Mick Taylor's vibrato on slide. And that was my first real influence, was him. But, it kind of all at the same time, it was, Ry Cooder. But when I heard Duane Allman play, I was like, damn, that is some greasy, fly by the seat of your pants stuff. So Duane's always been my favorite guy. I mean, even though, you know where the influences are and you know where it went and so on and so forth. But there's just something about Duane's playing, kind of like Greg Allman's singing. I mean, they were singular, you know what I mean? And they just had a thing. It was a once in a lifetime thing. And by God, they delivered.
Have you got any tips for how to make a good sound when you're playing slide?
Well, absolutely. I mean, a big part of that I learned early on, I had a book. I got a book by Arlen Roth. I remember I got it. It's when you could go to the mall and they were actually bookstore. I mean, there still are somewhere, but, and they had music books in there. And I bought this Arlen Roth slide guitar book, which had a little, vinyl thing insert that you would take out and listen to the stuff and so on and so forth. But the biggest thing I got from that book was his right hand muting technique. Cause I would see where, when Duane Allman I saw pictures of Duane Allman, he wasn't using a pick. And so but Duane did it a little bit differently, but kind of the template is, with your right hand, you have your ring finger on the high E string, middle finger on the B string, index finger on the G string, and then your thumb is kind of relegated to the bottom three strings. And that way, if I pick a note on the B string, I'm only using my middle finger and all the rest of the strings are muted. And that's particularly effective if you're in standard tuning, because obviously you can't play a full chord, like you can in an open tuning where you're tuned to open E or open G or whatever. And that was a huge thing for me because there's something about playing with your fingers with the right hand that allows you to pluck the strings and just get a feel and an articulation that's completely different and very effective, as I said, when you're playing in standard tuning. I used up my third finger on my left hand, although for years I used my pinky because obviously it's easier to finger chords and stuff with the other digits. But I just found that the third finger always was easier to control your phrasing and vibrato, primarily because it's easier to keep that slide perpendicular to the rest of the strings. When you're with your pinky, you always have a tendency to go a little bit horizontal. And plus with your pinky, you have a tendency to be more bottom heavy. So you're not evenly distributed over all the strings. And then there's people that say, well, use your middle finger. And the middle finger never really intrigued me much because I have a big, knuckle on my middle finger and it just kind of gets stuck and it's kind of awkward. So I went with my third finger. And once I saw Jack Pearson play and saw him doing, Wes Montgomery style octaves and comping just fine with the slide being on his third finger, I was like, okay, well, this can be done. So I started to do it less reservedly at that point.
And you mentioned Albert Lee a moment ago. Is that kind of where you got a lot of your sort of chicken picking stuff from?
Absolutely. Well, initially, I would stash my pick between my first and middle fingers and just use my thumb and my fingers to do chicken picking. And that was primarily for Mark Knopfler, because I loved just the way his clean strat sounded, and the way he would pluck those strings and, when he'd rake his thumb against, across several strings and then ultimately pop up with another finger when he hit a bend or something like that. And just the way he would comp, like just a simple rock and roll pattern. There was always that and I loved it. So that's where my primary way of doing that started. And then when I knew Albert Lee and Ray Flack and of course, James Burton, Danny Gatton, Albert Lee, all these guys, Roy Buchanan, they were all using pick and fingers. I forced myself to do it. And it was not an easy transition. It was very clumsy at first. And by this time I was probably in my early 20s. But I had been doing the chicken picking thing for years at that point, just using my fingers, and I would stash between my pick and my fingers. But it was around that time that I forced myself to to really use the hybrid technique. And as I said, it was uncomfortable at first, but by God, I got her down.
One of the other things that seems to separate you out from a lot of other guys that use, that pick and fingers hybrid picking technique is that you tend to do it with a much more sort of dirty sound, but still play very clean.
Well, I never liked compressors. And to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of country music, if we're honest. I mean, I like old country, and I'm not a real fan. I mean, this may sound blasphemous, but I do not like listening to all the, because it's become part of the lexicon of shred now to be a chicken picker, and I'm just not about that. So, I mean, it's fine if you want to do it, and certainly there are stunning examples of youngsters now that can play this blazing stuff. I just like the sound of plucking strings, and I thought it was funky sounding. I never really wanted to do it to the point where it was kind of just actually, mind bending. I just thought it was fun and weird. And so I guess when I started adding a little bit more gain to it, it was my way of trying to separate myself from that vibe. And again, I never used, and it was amazing to me. I did a session one time. This guy hired me to play on his record. And I got in the studio. He wanted me to do, it was more of kind of a country record, and he wanted me to do my chicken pick and stuff. And they compressed the shit out of it. And as I was playing it, I was like, oh my God, no wonder these guys use a compressor. It's so much easier to do this shit because everything sounds so much more even. That being said, it's still very hard style. I'm not trying to denigrate it or anything like that. But I'm just saying, for me, I just, because at the core of it, I'm a blues guy that got wise to some other things. And I do like that chicken picking stuff. And Lord knows I've blended it into what I do, but I'm just, I have a tendency that once people kind of go, oh, now there's a bunch of people doing it, I was like, let's take a look over here. I'm going to go over this particular neck of the woods.
Is it at this moment that we need to talk about gristle?
Yeah, we could do that. Sweet gristle.
So what does gristle mean to you?
Well, what was funny about it was that years ago, I mean, humor is a big part of, my existence and always has been. There's always been, shall we say, maniacal humor around wherever I am. There's hijinks afoot. And years ago when I was a youngin', I used to party a bit back in the day. I've given up all those activities, but back in the day, we'd raise hell, and there would be wild times at hand. And one of the things I did in lieu of trying to break out of my particular area is that I tried to gig as much as possible. And so my band would play out all over the place. And then during the weeknights, you'd try to come up with some other kind of ensemble that would be something different that people would want to come on a particular, a residency someplace. We used to just call them house gigs back in the day. Now people say residency, but we were looking for different house gigs. So we started this house gig on a Thursday night at a place called the Up and Under Pub, which is kind of a legendary blues dive in town here. It just closed a few years back. Now they've changed it to kind of a country bar, and it's called Nashville North. That just sounds heinous. Anyway, and so we got a gig there on a Thursday night, and one of my guys I really looked up to in town, kind of an influence of mine, was a guy named Bill Stone. And he had a band that he played in called Leroy Airmaster with another buddy of mine, Steve Cohen. And these guys, it was a blues band, but these guys had jazz chops. So, Steve was kind of, the harp player was, he's, I don't want to use the term. Well, he was more like Howard Levy from Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. He was buddies with Howard. So he had this ability to really improvise on the harp. And Bill Stone subsequently was with the guitar version of that. He was over blues environments. I mean, he could play standards like a demon. But when it came to blues stuff, he just did really cool, beboppy lines in addition to bending and having a snotty tone and so on. So I thought it'd be fun for Bill and I to start up a weeknight band. So because people always mispronounce my name Koch, they say cock or whatever, we called it the Stone Cock Blues Band, a turgid ensemble, if you will. And one night after we got done playing, which back then, by the end of the night, we had a little bit of our swerve on because we'd been serving ourselves a variety of fermented refreshments. And then we'd usually go out to get some late night cuisine. And we were at this particular restaurant, which was an all-night restaurant called Ma Fisher's. I've recently learned that it is no longer a 24-hour restaurant, which is another manifestation of the forces of evil prevailing in our Western society. But we were there late night pillaging, and we got into a food fight. And I don't remember what it was about or how. I just remember food flying and then going outside because we got kicked out of the restaurant or something was going on. And I remember a bit of gristle from someone's steak and eggs was hanging from the marquee of the Oriental Theater next door. And I found myself screaming at the top of my lungs, "Pound the gristle." So then "Pound the gristle" became our battle cry. So when it became time to do, like, get on stage, let's go pound some gristle. Or, if you were going to get lucky with the old lady, you're going to go home and pound some gristle. It was just like the catch-all for everything. And then it was a way that I would describe where I got a little, well, if I want a little bit gain on it, if I want a little bit of gristle, that's how it all came to being. So it was kind of the intersection where all that is right meets all that is wrong. And then the whole thing, where there's fat, there's flavor. There's a million of them. But that's the genesis of the gristle.
So it's almost an ethos.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I can hear that in your playing, the sort of where all that is wrong meets all that's right, because you're great at the sort of outside playing, and also your note choice is so unpredictable. Because I've spent, I've listened to a lot of your records, and so I know you're playing quite well, but when I hear improvising, you still always surprise me with where you go.
Well, thank you. I do my best to keep you on your toes.
So is that something intentional? Are you always trying to surprise yourself?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think a lot of it helped when, when I started doing those videos for Wildwood. I've got I've been doing it now for over a dozen years. And when you're doing 25, 30 guitars a day, and I'm basically just improvising the whole time, there are things that it kind of made me realize that, yes, there are things that I do that are part of my thing, but I also am trying to always add something new at every point in time. So, and obviously when in the point of doing a guitar demo where if I'm doing a Strat, I've got to do 5 little mini etudes at each toggle switch position. And then as I'm doing that, the guitar's intonation might be just for shit. So then I know that there's certain things I can play that are kind of irrespective of the guitar being in tune. I can make it sound in tune. You know what I mean? So I might go to that grab bag, but I'm always trying to add new things. But it also gave me an excellent opportunity to be able to, shall we say, edit my playing. So I'd hear things, I didn't listen to all of them by any stretch, but every now and again I get a notice, oh, there's some new videos up. Interesting, how shitty is this one? And then I would listen and be like, well, I like that, not so much. So it was kind of and then I would also be able to sense during those things of, well, I don't like doing so many of the licks as opposed to just random phrases that I'm hearing. And you can definitely tell when I'm in the moment versus, oh my God, I just want this one to be over with. So I kind of got into this mold of always trying to make it sound a little different. I'm that way with the heads of the songs as well. I'll do the head pretty much the same, but sometimes I'll completely change the syncopation of it just for the hell of it and see what happens. Because I view all compositions as, they're always in flux. They're always in development. So, but yeah, when I'm playing, I'm always thinking about, not thinking really, of just kind of being in the moment and letting that initial statement kind of set the tone. And then I'll just kind of go from there. So sometimes I'll start that statement kind of on the out and then say, okay, how am I going to get out of this one? And just kind of going from there. So it makes it fun. And again, when I'm doing 25 guitars a day, it's got to be about fun. So, or else you'll just go crazy. So that's kind of where that all comes from. I'm trying to surprise myself, but I'm also cognizant of the end user, of trying to, if you've been following my playing, not be bored. Because that always used to annoy me about once I really got into a player and realized, well, that's pretty much all you're going to get. You know what I mean? And there were a few players that I realized, like, no, every time you see that fucker, he's got a little something new. And I always wanted to be that guy. You know, I wanted to deliver the goods they were expecting, but I also wanted to have some stuff that was unexpected.
Obviously, going back to sort of how you learnt to play, did you have any formal training, or is most of your knowledge stuff that you've picked up just through playing?
No, I definitely went to school for music. You know, during high school, I played in jazz band. I had a couple different teachers. Then I did go to college for music. I went to the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. The guy that ran the jazz department was a guitar player who I had known prior, who was very open-minded. And that was important because I had some bad experiences with kind of traditional jazz guys that had that real uppity attitude about, oh, if you bend a string or if you play a solid body instrument, you know, you're worse than I don't know what. So, but he was very, very cool about it. So that was a good, I mean, I never really wanted to be a straight ahead jazz player per se. I grew a lot more amenable and skilled at it later on, but I mean, I could, you know, when I was in high school, you know, high school jazz band, you're playing comping like Freddie Green, you know what I mean? And I had good blues phrasing, and I understood that in a jazz environment to slide into notes as opposed to bending them to try to, you know, behave a little bit. So I was cognizant of all that, but you know, I was so, as I said, and again, this is my own personal experience. I'm sure there were other perfectly marvelous jazz mentors that a lot of people had, but you know, a lot of the, especially jazz academics, as opposed to guys who just did it for a living, of which there's, you know, not a ton. Most people have to be involved in academia in some way, shape, or form, but really can have that unless it's straight bebop or, you know, coloring within the lines of what they they think is jazz, can be unpleasant. And so, and then everyone who plays rock and roll, I mean, they would, I remember I would get the vibe from these guys, like anything between Devo and Yes was all that rock shit. It's like, no, there's a huge gap here, folks. There's a lot of different stuff going on here. And so that really kind of, you know, pissed the pool a little bit for me until later on, where I got far enough away from those folks and realized that the real guys that were gigging jazz musicians were all just cool. A buddy of mine years ago, an older guy, told me, he's like, listen, all the heavies are as light as feathers. And that has turned out to be true. The people that can really play and that are successful are usually the coolest people and are the most generous and easiest to hang with. So that's been true. But as far as music school is concerned, I did learn, you know, I wanted to know how to play over changes, and I wanted to know how to read and write music in somewhat of a professional fashion, and certainly that all happened.
You've been quite involved in music education over the years as well, with like instructional books and videos and obviously masterclasses. Is that something you enjoy doing as well?
I do. You know, to be honest with you, it's something I didn't think I'd ever do. But, you know, when I got married and we started to have kids, I was realizing, well, I better do everything and anything possible. But then I realized after my first couple clinics and just doing it that, you know, people were like, you know, you're a pretty good teacher. I mean, you should think about, you know, and of course I was always wary of, you know, people pigeonholing you. Well, you know, those who can't teach. I'm like, yeah, eat shit. I always say, those who survive do. And that's the bottom line. But yeah, so I ended up with the Hal Leonard thing is how it started. Ended up doing, you know, books 1, 2, and 3 of their basic method. And the first book I ever did for him was a blues book. And they didn't, you know, basically said, hey, write a blues book. You can use copywritten material. And basically take someone from an advanced beginner thing to a blues jam by the end. And I realized that, you know, I had a good kind of grasp on how to do that. So, but it was a lot of work, man. And it took me a long time because as much as I had learned how to notate music, I was not fluid. So it would take me forever to write all this stuff out. Even the basic stuff, I'd have to go, now what's a half note rest again? And so, you know, it took me long to kind of get those chops up to whatever kind of a form where I could produce. And then I would do the videos, and man, those videos, I mean, I did the 2 Stevie Ray Vaughan signature licks videos, which sold I mean, I did it when Hal Leonard was saying, you want to do this? You want to do that? I'm like, yes, I'll do all of it. And so I remember I got back, I was on the road doing a bunch of Fender stuff. And the video shoot was like on a Thursday. And so I was like, shit, I better learn this stuff. But I knew all of this stuff by ear, right? So, and it was up to me to show which parts of the song. They weren't songs in their entirety. They were like the signature licks of the tune. But I put together but I told the guys, I was like, listen, instead of me just sitting on a chair playing with tracks, which would be lame, I go, why don't you let me do it with a band? So that was kind of the first time they let a band be a part of these instructional videos. That wasn't, like a star oriented thing. And that went well, and those sold a lot. I still run into people all the time that say, I used to learn from your videos back in the day. It's like, wow, that's pretty crazy. And that also makes me feel ancient, but cool nonetheless. So there you have it. But yeah, and then I ended up teaching at a college for a while. And that was a whole nother thing. My son was going to a school in Minneapolis or St. Paul called the McNally Smith College of Music, which was really a great school. And it was kind of modeled after Berkeley, great facility, great teachers, the whole 9 yards. And a guy that kind of taught a survey of styles for the upperclassmen had actually gone to teach at Berkeley out in Boston. So they were looking for someone to come in and do a kind of a survey of styles, both from a playing point of view and from a historical point of view. And they asked me to do it. And I was like, listen, I'm traveling all the time. There's no way I can do it. My son was going to that school at the time, and it was very expensive. I knew that. And they said, well, if you could do this class, we'll make you full-time faculty, and your kid goes to school for free. I'm like, interesting. I said, yeah, but I can't be up there full time. They said, we'd only need you here 2 days a week, and we'd give you salary and benefits. I said, how's Monday and Tuesday? And so I started to do it, but it was a fascinating experience. I learned a couple different things. I learned that I could put together a curriculum. I mean, it was based on the former guy's curriculum, but I added different things to it. I made up my own tests. I made up my own musical examples for more than not. And then I had to grade and, all that kind of stuff. So I proved to myself that I could do it. But in doing so, I realized I don't want to do it. So and primarily it was because I really got into a situation where, I'm in a rarefied situation. If I'm doing a master class or doing a clinic someplace, everyone's there because they want to be. And they're there because they know who I am, they know what I do, and they want me to show them their stuff, and it's great. In a classroom situation like that, you've got people ranging from, well, I guess I'll go to music school because my mom and dad are going to pay for it, versus the guy goes, well, I saved up all my money to go to music school because I want to be a rock star, and I'm already good enough, so I just want to go there so someone discovers me, or whatever. They're all over the map. But, when you get into a class and like people show up and they're not prepared and they haven't done the homework, and then it was just so counterintuitive for me to get my brain around. And I lost it, which is for me to lose it. I mean, I'm like the most easy-go-lucky guy you can get, but I taught there for 2 semesters and I would lose it once a semester. And the one time I lost it, I remember going, listen, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but you are entering into one of the most impossible businesses to succeed in under the best of circumstances. And none of you motherfuckers are the best of circumstances. And they didn't listen to that either. So, I mean, they were like, oh, but it was such an awesome facility. And in retrospect now, a lot of the students that I taught have come back and said that was a huge influence on my career as a musician, and I really enjoyed that. And so it was worthwhile. But in the moment, you're a little like, Jesus. But it was worthwhile doing, and people got something out of it. And luckily, after 2 semesters, my son was like, I don't think I want to go to school anymore. I'm like, awesome. Awesome. I can find other ways to spend my time. But I do enjoy teaching, though. I mean, I enjoy, I think I've got a knack for showing people how to do things and kind of seeing where they're at and catering what I'm going to teach them to the level that they're at. but yeah, it's a strange thing. I go through waves where just like I just can't teach anymore right now, and so I stopped the Skype lessons from the website. I still say Skype. It's more like Zoom lessons now, I guess. Internet dialogue lessons. But I might do it again and fire it up. You know, so many times it's weird though, because sometimes you do lessons and people just want to talk. You know, it's just like, hey, I want to show you this cool shit. You can do this and this and this thing. Yeah, well, let's talk a little. And they're like, oh, okay. And then next thing you know, you're just kind of a counselor. And I'm cool with whatever. But I don't know. I guess when you're so passionate about playing and it's all about playing and getting excited about playing, and any thing that you do that isn't that same level of intensity, you're kind of like, oh, if that makes sense.
Do you think in today's music industry you have to be able to wear a lot of hats?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean that's the good part of it is that kind of with the internet, you're in a situation where you can reach your own crowd. You got to build that crowd, and that's difficult. I mean, you know what always used to annoy me is that guys that were really good and that were successful would always use the term, you know, the cream always rises to the top. And in my experience, the cheese always rises to the top. And that's not to say that really good musicians don't become successful. They do. And that, you know, if you're good enough and you work hard enough, you know, good things will happen. I do believe that. But there's always a degree of luck to it as well. But the more hats you can wear yourself, the less you're dependent on somebody. And I mean, my daughter's just starting off now. I mean, she's got a college degree, and about, I don't know, 9 months ago, she started posting songs online. She's playing guitar. She's got this little fingerstyle pattern. I knew she could sing, but she's written all these songs. I'm like, what is this? So now we're doing a record for her, but I'm kind of at odds of how to go through with it because I don't want it to be like, oh, I'm foisting her, you know, pushing her or whatever the case may be. So she's going to open mics by herself and no one knows who she is. And she's just on her own merits, building up a thing and so on and so forth, which is awesome. But she knows right away. She's like, I've looked into how to release a single and do this, that. I mean, so she's doing all the stuff that she knows she needs to do because, you know, we're in an age where, although we haven't been in this particular age for a long time, where people grab an artist and cultivate them for a long-term career. They want stuff that's already ready to go. That's an absolutely no-brainer that they can somehow harvest for all that they can. And they usually had somebody who's already got gajillions of followers on social media and so on and so forth. And by that point, what do you need somebody else for? But yeah, the more you can do on your own. I mean, I do 99% of my own posts. As I said, I've got a gal that will do posts that are like, you know, just posting the dates. And it was great because I had my old gal could speak in my language, so she would use my vernacular to describe it. It was awesome. I'm hoping the new gal who we just got is going to have the same skills. But yeah, you gotta. I mean, I do it all. I interface with the agents. You know, I'm going back and forth about, do we do this gig? Do we do that gig? Do we want this routing? Hey, how about this over there? All the instructional stuff. I manage all of the, I've got a guy that helps me, a manager that helps me, but, I'm maintaining my merch. Hey, I need X amount of things. Can you order this? Can you order that? And he takes care of the ordering. All the different, interfaces between all the different brands that I got going on. I've always done that myself. Yeah, I mean, the more stuff you can do yourself, the better. And that's all there is to it. Because if you're thinking somebody else is going to do it for you, they ain't. And if they do, there's a price to be paid.
So the cream rises to the top, but it's got to paddle pretty hard.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Is it all right if we talk a little bit about your gear now?
Yeah, no problem.
So you've got the Reverend Gristle Master.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, it started with me having the pickups with Fishman. So I was approached by Fishman about their Fluence pickups. And at first I really didn't give a shit, to be honest with you. I'm like, yeah, I know Larry Fishman's a good guy. And the guy that approached me, I had worked with a ton at Fender back in the day. So I knew it was going to be good, but I was already pretty busy at that point. And, having another thing on the pile didn't really intrigue me. But then when he described what they did, I'm like, well, that makes sense. That seems like something that I would want to use. So started off doing that, and it all came together really well. And that's been perfect. I've been doing that for a dozen plus years. But so my first set of pickups were for a Telecaster. And I got them all ready to go, and I had them in a Fender Custom Shop guitar. And at that point, I wasn't doing a lot with Fender. For 15 years, I was kind of, their words, not mine, their ambassador. I went everywhere for them. I did clinics. We did concerts. I would debut gear. I hosted their, annual meeting. I mean, all kinds of shit. But I was never an employee. And once they got a new owner after the cabal that I dealt with for years on end, I just didn't have it in me to schmooze a whole new bunch of corporate numbskulls. So I was like, hey, if you want me to do stuff, fine. If not, we're good. So I remember I approached, because I still knew a bunch of guys from Fender, and I said, hey, you should check out my new pickups that I did with Fishman. Maybe we should do something together. And I remember I went in, it was at Summer NAMM in Nashville, and they're playing my pickups, and there was a new guy in charge of guitars, and he's like, yeah, we got our own pickups. And I looked at it, I was like, I know what you have. I know exactly what you have, because prior to you being here, which was 5 minutes ago, it's typical. A lot of times, you get affiliated with a big brand, and next thing you know, they're farting potpourri, like within moments. It's like all of a sudden they're titans of industry as soon as they have, they're working for the big boys. So whatever the case may be, they had no desire to do anything with my pickups. And it even was so weird that we were going to do like a special, and what was really weird about it is that Fishman had done, and still to this day, I mean, all those Acoustasonic guitars that Fender does, that's all Fishman stuff in there. So it was just weird. They were very much kind of just into their own pickups, but again, you order stuff from the custom shop, you can get a Seymour Duncan this, you can get a DiMarzio that, but they were totally not going into the Fluence realm with Fishman pickups for whatever reason. So having said that, I was like, okay, well, fuck them. So I was like, I'll just continue to play, the guitars I want to play with the pickups in, and then I just got to be real good buddies with the Reverend guys. Because they would come out to Wildwood, and Ken Haas and I would do videos together for Reverend under the auspices of Wildwood, and we just got along great. And everyone thought we were brothers because we're about the same height, we're from the same area of the country, and we were just goofy together. So people always thought that we had, that we were brothers. And then I was at a NAMM show one time, and I'm seeing these flyers being handed out, and Reverend always had the funnest parties with the coolest artwork for their NAMM parties. And I finally just said to Ken, I was like, Ken, how can I play at one of your parties? It sounds like fun. He's like, well, you have to play a Reverend guitar. And I said, I'll tell you what, why don't you throw my pickups in one of those Pete Anderson guitars and see what happens? He's like, I'd be down with that. So, and this is right around the time I had put together my band with my son and with Toby. So we were looking at gigging everywhere and anywhere. And so I got a Pete Anderson guitar with my Fluence pickups in them. And I remember there was a difference between that guitar and the custom shop guitar that I had, but it wasn't like a $3,000 difference. You know what I mean? And then I started to go, interesting. So then Ken was like, listen, you and I are buddies, Joe Naylor, the inventor of all the stuff, the designer of all the Reverend stuff. He goes, we're all friends. He goes, we'd love to do something with you, but if not, no big deal. We'll continue on being buddies. Not a big deal. And so then I just had, because I had an idea for guitars when I was with Fender. I was like, listen, I'm 6'7". Every time I grab a Tele or a Strat, people look at me and they're like, is that a 3/4 size guitar? I said, why don't we do a guitar that's just a little slightly bigger? And now we got new pickups to put in. I like this kind of a bridge. I like this kind of a radius. So one thing led to another, and then that's how the guitar came. They had no problem using the Fishman pickups. They had no problem doing a slightly larger body. We did fun things with the design, and it just turned out great. So, and those have been very successful. Those guitars sound awesome. That's my main gigging guitar. And then we went in, and then I wanted more of a kind of a Gibson scale version with P90s. So I worked on P90s with Fishman. So I got a signature set of P90s, which sound awesome. And then they went into a Reverend guitar that was set neck, shorter scale, ebony fingerboard with the Bigsby on it with, the new pickups in it. So that's been awesome. We also have another guitar coming out, which it's a little bit hush-hush at this point, but let's just say that there's going to be another set of pickups on another style of guitar that's also going to be in the family. That'll be slightly larger body. Now, that being said, the slightly larger body isn't so big that it's off-putting to someone that's smaller. And they fit in conventional style cases, but they just look a little more proportionate to the larger individual.
And what are you using for amps at the moment?
I'm using Tone Kings. I did have my relationship with Koch amplifiers for many years, and it was just time for a change. It just had run its course. It's a shame, to be honest with you, but from a musical point of view, the amps I designed with them is when I was initially in a trio with a bass player, and they worked great for that. They worked great for most of the situations I was in. But when I got into my trio with my boas, I realized I needed more gas. I needed something that was going to cut through more. So then I had to use multiple amps. So I was using 2 of those amps. Then I started using the head and the 212 cabinet, and that was working a little bit better. But it's still, there were reasons. So then I was approached by Tone King to check out one of their amps. And I had used Tone King amps for years at Wildwood as the video amp. For years, I used a Tone King Imperial. It was a great amp. So I got the Royalist, and which is basically, it's a combo. You can see it behind me. There's this little rascal here with the single 12 extension cabinet. It's basically like 2 Marshalls in one. So, and there's an attenuator for both channels. So I either use the 1-channel setup in the like the JTM 45 setting, which is what they call their 64 setting, and then I'll run that just at the point of slightly breaking up, and then I'll use my Gristle King pedal to kind of kick it over the edge. But lately, when I've been doing my videos in the Orange Room here for folks, when I just do my daily little noodles that I post on Instagram, I've been using the 67 plexi sound and kind of cranking it a little bit more. And then I have the fat switch out, and I put the attenuator on. When I've been gigging live, I haven't been using the attenuator, so it's a little loud, which is something I'm going to have to address. We are a loud band, and it's great if rooms are meant to have loud bands, but sometimes people have to, hey, let's have music here. And they're like, why are you guys so deafening? I'm like, oh, I don't know, maybe because we're a rock band that, plays real instruments. But I do love the attenuator on this thing. It sounds great. And so I've been using that. And I also been using the Imperial as well. And I'd like the attenuator on that when I want more of the Fendery thing. But, I've always used to say, when you're done fucking around, play a Marshall, because that's basically my favorite sound of all time. Is all of my favorite guitar players played Marshalls. But it's just, the practicality of it is, not reasonable anymore. This makes it reasonable because of the attenuator, the size, the whole 9 yards. So it's really fun to be able to get that sound and have it be practical.
And do you have any sort of absolute must-have pedals that you take with you?
Well, my Gristle King is my main one. But my pedal board, I've been, I have some jam pedals. As a matter of fact, I've got a new jam pedal, 2 different jam pedal multi-effects coming out later on this year. But basically, I always like some kind of a rotating speaker effect. So I've got my Neo Instruments ventilator that I've had for years. Lately, I've been using the Mini Vent 2 because it's a little less real estate on my pedal board. I like the Jam Pedals Waco for my wah-wah pedal. I love their Univibe, which is called the Retro Vibe. I use their Delay Llama Supreme for a little bit of slapback. I still use a Boss DD3 for a little bit longer delay. I just use a hair of delay. It's almost barely perceptible, but I like to just have it on a little bit. But I use my Gristle King for a clean boost and overdrive. And then I've been messing around a little bit with that MXR Timmy pedal, which I used to use quite a bit when I used the Koch amp. But now since I've gotten the Tone King, I don't really hit it. I just use my Gristle King, and that's it. But yeah, the Gristle King's got a clean boost and an overdrive. On this next tour that I'm doing, I probably won't use the pedal as much because I'm just really liking just the overdrive when I crank the amp. It has a thing to it. But that being said, I know in the heat of battle, I'll be stomping on that damn thing.
Needs to go over the precipice.
Exactly correct.
My final question today: have you got any advice to musicians who are learning their craft? What is the most important thing to focus on?
Well, it's hard to say because there are different approaches to take. I kind of went with I was prepared to be a sideman and I could function as a sideman, but I realized that I always wanted to have my own band. And for security purposes of career wise and so on and so forth, that was the smartest move to make. But then once those choices were made, everything was kind of, as far as gear and everything else like that, it was always kind of centered around my own band and how to approach things. If you really want to be a side person and play in somebody else's band, then you got to play ball a lot more, in terms of, especially nowadays, so many people want silent stages. So you got to work on some kind of a digital rig that doesn't make any noise on stage and be fluent with that. You got to have inner monitors and know how to play in that scenario. You have to work on your look because they want some kind of, unified presentation on stage. That's the thing that you always used to, I'd be crazy over the years I'd run into, because I did obviously so many of these different gear bacchanals where various different representatives of the gear would get together and play shows. And a lot of these guys were side guys. You'd have this guy who plays in this band, this guy who plays in that band. And they definitely had their look, and earlier in the day you'd see them in sweats, and then by the evening they're in their stage clothes. And then I always dressed up a little bit on stage, but that's why I always loved the Allman Brothers so much, because they were just like, yeah, I just don't give a fuck. I'm going to go on. You know what? I am cool, whether I'm in a t-shirt or a cape. You know what I mean? But I was very cognizant of the fact that those guys have to cultivate this look, and they always have to be on the prowl for another gig. So they always got to be in a situation where they might run into somebody who's a leader for another band, like, hey, this guy or gal's got their look together. They act professional. They're a fun hang. All that other kind of stuff. So there's a lot of intersecting of those skill sets. But it's definitely a different thing. But it's good to have the ability to play with anybody if you need to, and to know how to be able to play. To me, I was petrified about being a musician because my dad was a lawyer and no one in our family was a musician or into the arts. So his initial thought was that I was ruining my life and that I was going to end up, working at a burger shop or something. Not that there's anything wrong with it. So he made me paranoid about being as versatile as possible. And most of the stuff I did because I enjoyed it, but I also was cognizant of, well, if I'm asked to do X, Y, and Z, I better be able to do it at a very high functioning level. So I did learn a bunch of those different styles and worked on a bunch of different stuff so that I could be able to pull it off if asked to do so. And I think that's a good thing to still have to know. But the business is it's just so weird now. It's so different. But being on time or being early is being on time. And and the other thing is that, as much as I don't want to harp on it, but I used to think that partying was a big calling card. You had to know how to party in order to be a good hang. You had to be able to hang out with people and party like a Viking, do legendary shit, but not fuck up. And I thought that was a skill set, and I practiced it every bit as hard as I did as being a musician. And then I realized that was horseshit, and that I was going to die unless I changed. So I quit drinking and doing everything years and years ago. And as a result, it just helped me in so many different ways as far as being able to function professionally. Especially now, there'd be no way I could do what I'm doing with our schedule when we tour if I was getting fucked up. There would just be no way. So, you got to come to grips with that, is that, there's the legend of being the musician, of partying and the hang. And sure, there are people in rarefied situations where, they could probably pull that off in the short term. But if you want to be a musician that's wearing all the different hats that we talked about earlier, you have no time for being a reprobate. Let's put it that way.